You know, when I started this channel, it was ultimately about discipleship, about making real people of character and quality, people who think, act, and treat others the way that Jesus did.
And we were outside one day at youth group, kind of not taking the Lord serious. And I walked over to him and I went, bam!
And the church has done a really bad job of accomplishing that task.
I punched him in the chest as hard as I crumpled the kid. I led that man to the Lord right there.
Most Christians I meet today suck a little bit, and they're not people of quality or character or any of those things. So I want to talk about courage.
Why, you're nothing but a great big coward.
You're right, I am a coward. I haven't any courage at all.
It's a characteristic of discipleship that is often underrepresented. It's often not talked about enough. And courage is more than just the absence of fear. It's not just feeling brave and not feeling afraid. In fact, some would say that you can only demonstrate courage when you feel afraid.
Me? Yes, you. I gotta get around there.
That's right.
All right. I'll go in there for Dorothy. Wicked witch, oh no wicked witch. Gods and no gods, I'll tear them apart. I may not come out alive, but I'm going in there.
Courage is doing what is required, what is morally right in the face of fear. And that's what we're talking about this week.
Kindred UMC live show features adults discussing adult topics, occasionally with adult language. It may not be suitable for young viewers. Please use discretion before watching.
Hello all, welcome once again to the Kindred UMC pre-recorded live show, coming to you not live, but pre-recorded from my front room, aka Kindred Studio A. My name is Chris Hayden. I am the pastor of Kindred UMC.
I'm Preston, I'm in the middle.
I'm Ryan, I'm the end.
There we go. Very literal this week. So we are continuing our look at the book of Daniel, the first 6 chapters, because the rest of the book is apocalyptic and weird. And that takes too much time to talk about, and I'm not interested.
Please.
Being thorough and thoughtful. I'm much more interested in telling you all to give me money so that our church can buy me a jet.
I think you need curlier hair. Or whiter hair.
Or hair at all, actually. So what comes to mind? I literally just told you what we're talking about, so this question's a little spoiled. What comes to mind, per se, when you think about the biblical character of Daniel?
Daniel and the coat of many colors.
Yeah. That's right, it's the lion's den.
Oh, okay.
So this is finally the story that most people, if you've been around church at all, and even if you haven't, even in just secular culture, Daniel and the lion's den is kind of like a story that you may or may not have heard of, but most people I think have. Normally when I do this, there's like hey, there's a new way we're gonna look at this and read it and understand it. Not so much with this one. It's pretty straightforward, actually. So we'll see what comes of that. For those of you who have not been watching our previous videos, which I will ask Ann to link up there. This is the 6th chapter, so Daniel's already kind of been through a bunch of stuff. Does anybody know when the book of Daniel is set? Like the setting?
Before Jesus.
That's true.
Wow.
That's correct.
I got nothing.
It's in the reign of Nebuchadnezzar.
That's right. Yeah. That's where it starts, actually.
I want to say Babylon.
Yeah, Babylon. Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Meshach, Radio Shack, and away we go.
That's right. Yeah, I nailed it. 100% correct. Yes, so it's set in Babylon. It starts under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. There's a different king in chapter 5, and now there's even a newer king in chapter 6. So the kings are kind of like,
why?
Daniel's been through a lot of them, mostly because they piss off God. All right, I probably shouldn't say that. We'll see if I remember to bleep that. They make God angry and upset, and then God kind of renders judgment upon them. But Daniel's been through a bunch of kings, which is actually, we're going to get to that. There's kind of a running joke in the book of Daniel about that we've read several times now, but I'll point it out this time because it's funnier if you realize it at the end. Okay, so Daniel and the Lion's Den, chapter 6 of the book of Daniel, 1 through 28, I think is how many verses. They sound like this, and we'll pause to just get like, so what's happened, all right? So it pleased, I'm off to a great start. It pleased Darius, who is the new king. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, stationed throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 presidents, including Daniel. So it's kind of like just a tiered like governmental structure.
It's cabinet.
Yeah, mostly about, and it's mostly with economics and taxing, you know. To these the satraps gave account so that the king might suffer no loss. Again, economic. So Daniel distinguished himself above all the other presidents and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to appoint him over the whole kingdom. So the presidents and the satraps tried to find grounds for complaint against Daniel in connection with the kingdom, but they could find no grounds for complaint or any corruption because he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption could be found in him. The men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." So Daniel's doing a good job. People get jealous and they want to like undermine him. They can't find anything with him because, true to his character up to this point, he's very like honest and he has a strong character. So they're like, we're going to have to trick him into the God thing. This is very similar to the story we read with Radio Shack, Meshach, and, you know.
Away we go.
Yeah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And the reasons for that are probably because these were individual stories that were then brought together under one writer who didn't actually write them, but just like collected them into a book, you know?
You mean the Shadrach?
All the different chapters, 1 through 6, are all kind of standalone little stories, and they seem to repeat the same themes. Like they have the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that story is ultimately about the court trying to find a way to get the king to kill the Jews. And the court tricks the king into doing it, and then they ultimately get saved by God. Like that's basically the story, and we're going to see a very similar pattern here. It's just that it's different characters. Instead of Nebuchadnezzar, it's Darius. Instead of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it's Daniel.
So primarily a recurring theme of like the powers of the world, or the powers of, you know, the order that you are surrounded in do not have sway over the powers of God.
Right. And for the people who were, because this was written at a time when Israel was being conquered by Assyria, which is why it was written about when Israel was conquered by Babylon. So this is kind of a message of hope for people who are under oppression. That, hey, God is still here. Remember our stories, remember our history, remember how God has been faithful in similar situations. And so there's like this recurring theme that keeps happening over and over again. So verse 6, excuse me, just to avoid a dry throat. So the presidents and satraps conspired and came to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever." That's the little joke. Every time throughout this book they greet the king, it's "O King, live forever." This is the 4th king that Daniel has served under because they keep dying. So like every chapter has at least one instance of "O King, live forever," and then the kings keep dying. So O king, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an interdict that whoever prays to anyone, divine or human, for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into a den of lions. Now, O king, establish the interdict and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and the interdict. So what are they, like, they can't get him on any fairgrounds, so, like, how do they get him?
You make a loophole.
And what's the nature of that loophole?
Whatever he's doing, let's make that wrong.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Sure, he's praying he's not praying to you, which I didn't know was a thing. I thought it was just a
it wasn't until they make the law. They're saying, make it a law that they can only pray to you for 30 days. And if they pray to anyone else, then that's against the law. That's kind of the language they're using. And I think it's interesting they say for 30 days, like, because they don't want to obey that law for very long either.
No. I'm also thinking, what's the end goal? Is they get him. They finally get him. And then
I try to think about what would make the king be like, solid. I'll get it. I love it. It's a great idea.
I'm glad you asked that question. Babylon it's a little bit more United Nations than it is United States. It's multiple cultures being held together by a political structure. And so the king needs to appease, and they kind of reference it when they say, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians. Mm-hmm. So this is a custom. They're like, hey, you're the new king. You need to maintain some political power. So let's make this new law where everyone has to pray to you, which is something that's normal for the Medes and the Persians, And so they're kind of like, they're using the political vulnerability against the king. Okay. Another important fact that will become evident, or at least a little questionable as we read, the law that gets signed into, because it says he says, yay, okay, let's do it, he cannot, even though he is king, contradict that law because of the vulnerable political situation. He will undermine the very thing that gives him authority if he counteracts it. So even though he's the one who signs it into law, he can't just be like, well, then don't do that. Screw it. Don't enforce it. Like, he doesn't have the pardon, Like, he doesn't have the ability to counteract the law that he just signed in. Mm-hmm. And it's a weird little political thing, but that's kind of the nature of the story, Okay. Although Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he continued to go to his house, which had windows in its upper room open toward Jerusalem, and to get down on his knees 3 times a day to pray to his God and praise him, just as he had done previously. The conspirators came and found Daniel praying and seeking mercy before his God. Then they approached the king and said concerning the interdict, O king, did you not sign an interdict that anyone who prays to anyone, divine or human, within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be thrown into a den of lions? The king answered, the thing stands fast, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they responded to the king, Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the interdict you have signed, but he is saying his prayers 3 times a day. So what is Daniel's response to the interdict? I know this is like basic questions, but it helps the people.
It keeps going as normal.
Yeah, it keeps going as normal.
I was going to say whatever.
Yeah, he essentially ignores it, continues to pray to Yahweh, his God, and then he gets caught doing it, and like he's not even hiding it. He's like, yeah, do it, fine.
Caught doing it like, I pray 1-2 times, knock at the door.
He's like, it says he prays 3 times a day with his windows open.
Okay. A stipulation. Someone looking into a residence.
I don't think the Babylonians have the same kinds of rights that we appreciate here in the United States.
I think they do. The United States
also
of
Search
Babylon.
and seizure.
Also, if he has his windows open, there's a chance that people could hear in passing, depending upon.
Also, yeah,
No,
like
right.
I would say even that's not search and seizure does not extend to if your windows are wide open and you're committing a crime.
And no
the
AC,
police can come.
so I understand.
Yeah.
I need to let some of this out.
So he keeps on praying to Yahweh and in fairly public view.
What if the king was like, how'd you find out? Like, who's doing your job?
Well,
They were running around being like, we got to catch this guy.
I think if the character in this story of the king was strong enough to say that, he probably wouldn't have signed the thing in the first place. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like Darius is a bit of a weakling in this story.
A puppetish.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the concept of like, we can't attack this person for things that they've done in the past. Let's just attack his character.
Yeah. Well, so
I mean, it's almost a parallel to.
So let's take because it's a long text. Please read chapter 2. It's a fun story. It's good, but I think we all know Daniel gets thrown in the lion's den. He survives. It's interesting that Darius is like, "What, Daniel? Like, I need him. He's one of my best guys, and still has to do it anyway because of the political situation." But so.
We are collecting funds to help support a community in Rwanda through an organization called Zoe Empowers. They teach communities necessary skills, how to start a business, how to be entrepreneurs, so that not only they can support themselves, but they can help support their communities through employment and having a living wage. So if you would like to practice your generosity without fear of where it's going, without fear of it going to some rich pastor's pocket, every cent that you give to our church will go directly to supporting that community in Rwanda. Please consider giving and give generously. You can use the QR code or the links down in the description below, or you can mail a check directly to our P.O. Box. All of that is linked in the description. So please give generously.
I guess the question that I'd like to talk about is, like, have you ever been in that situation? Have you ever been, I don't know, maybe judged or, I can't think of the right word, but like attacked is too strong a word, but like, have you ever been come after around things like this? Have you ever been in a situation like that?
Yeah, since this is for adults, I always like to tie these into like work scenarios because hopefully all of you work. And if you're not a good B. But like, so with accounting now in the future, so there's like Microsoft Teams and there's just all kinds of new things where you pretty much track what everyone's doing at all times.
I think it's funny you said accounting now in the future.
Yeah.
We do live in the future. You are right.
By the way, it's never leaving because AI can only do so much and there's got to be some kind of human thought and hand.
For now.
For now.
Anyway, go ahead.
So there's a tracking process, and I've been caught a few times of either cutting corners, which is an accounting principle, cutting corners and being efficient.
Like, I got my degree in cutting corners.
Yeah, master's, by the way. Where I'll have my trail log is what I call it. So it'll say this was done by me at this time on this day. So when someone finds like, why would somebody move A to B when it didn't need to be, they'll go into the log and find that it was me. And then during a meeting with 30 people, that's when things are called out for some reason. I guess that's just what this company believes in, which is fine with me. It's funny, to be honest, because I know I'm right. And you have to kind of explain yourself. So there's like our policy says this, but that's dumb here. For lack of a better term, this is dumb. This can be done in 5 minutes versus 3 weeks of waiting for approvals from people or this or that. So the thrown into the lion's den is a higher up saying you should have done it this way via policy that I've never done or will never do and have taught you to do, by the way.
I taught you to break this rule.
Yeah.
And now it's like, hey, you broke that rule.
It almost lines up perfectly with this of let's create this policy to see if we can catch others doing it. However, there's a clause down here that's not written that says we don't do it this way anymore. Let's do that. And these policies haven't been updated in 10 or 15 years. So there's a slight thing there, but that's kind of a lion's den type work thing where it's not that you're set up, but if you find another way and on my fault, don't present it as, hey, this should be the way from now on.
Yeah.
The lions will come to get you.
Yeah. Or I guess
sounds like it works
out all right.
We're good.
Yeah. Right.
They love me.
Well, good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
It doesn't always. I know there's a lot of lion's den situations where the lions eat you.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, but I got there with the other lions, aka the directors of the company, who were like, "Hey, buddy, we're all
make friends with the lions." Is actually one. So, like, we'll talk about that in a minute. Ryan, do you have anything that comes to mind?
Could you rephrase that question so I can better understand it?
Well, so first of all, the real question is what comes to mind. So there's no wrong answer. Whatever you're thinking is the right answer.
Okay.
Because we're in an interpretive area now. There's no I'm not definitively saying this is what the scripture's about. So everything I'm asking is really just trying to guide you and give you some structure if that helps.
But for like a reference, it would be like, have you ever felt like you were set up? Or
Have you ever felt set up? Have you ever felt like people were kind of like questioning your character unfairly? Anything in that realm.
I don't know necessarily about having my character questioned, but I think in the context of which I work with patients dealing with recovery, sometimes I have to act as like disciplinarian. And according to X rule or X policy, if a patient does this thing, like in this case, for example, skipping or missing out of group, which is, a 3-hour thing. And if you're gone for a majority of it, it's pretty noticeable that you're not there. And sometimes when I meet up and chat with them afterwards to kind of see where they're at, especially if they're like newer to the program, I personally feel like cutting some slack because I'm like, I feel
like they're getting their feet wet.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost like an extension of grace in that point too, where I feel like this doesn't feel worth coming down and being this way.
But it's also what's going to push them out.
So
the reason they're relying on substances is because somebody didn't give them that in the first place.
So could potentially.
Nice.
But it becomes a question of like, do I extend this moment of like, hey, it's just a one-off thing. Like, don't worry about it. Let's just make sure you keep going on it. And then like later on down the road, if this person is being, belligerent or so, usually there ends up being like a 3 strikes you're out type of thing.
Yeah.
And some higher ups are like, why didn't this person get out, why didn't this person get like kicked out sooner if they've been this way, always? And I'm just sitting here thinking like, well, I guess if
it takes time to figure out whether or not they are that way always.
True.
Yeah.
And I would rather err on the side of, someone's just trying their best than immediately go in just being like, no, they're just jerks. They're just jerks and gonna put them in their place that way.
So there's a principle that I was taught called assume positive intent. I'm pretty bad at it actually. But assume positive intent. If there's doubt, give the other person the benefit of the doubt. If you can interpret an action in a way that is that's obviously a malicious person who's trying to do harm.
Right. And if I can smell that it's like malicious intent right across the bat, like they're just skipping just because
then you act on that
group. Yeah.
Right.
But most times it's like
But if there's doubt, then it's like, well, assume that they wanted good and screwed up.
Yeah.
Assume that. Like and I think that's a better way to live. Like not just because you're in a pretty high stakes scenario you're describing.
Yeah.
But I think that's generally, like in traffic, assume positive intent. Assume they're doing their best, Assume that's a person who's like, I don't know how to merge so good, The,
when you're describing it kind of like that, it reminds me of the phrase that pretty much everything that everyone ever does is an effort to feel more okay.
Yes.
And even if I don't agree,
That's a great phrase.
and
That's
even
a
if I
great
don't
little thing.
agree with it,
Yeah.
based on the context of the knowledge that they're coming with, their background experiences, and what they've tried before, they're like, the brain is just putting the stuff in the equation. It's the computer program to say, logically, this is the only solution.
Well, that's such an interesting, I wanted to talk about Darius as the main character because normally in a story, the main character is someone who goes through a transition.
Or has the book named after them.
Yeah, yeah, or literally is the name of the book. But in this case, Daniel doesn't go through any transitions. He doesn't learn anything. Like he starts faithful, he stays faithful, he remains faithful, and then he gets rescued by God. You know, it's like there's no change there. The person that goes on the journey is Darius. Darius is the hero of the story because he's the one who actually learns something. And he's the one who is kind of like in the situation you just described. You know, like he's like just trying to be okay.
Yeah.
And he's overwhelmed with this new position as king. And like he's just doing what he thinks he's supposed to do. And then comes to find out, oh, there's more to it than that, you know? And I think between Darius and Daniel, because they're the two prominent things in the story, I think this is something that we don't often talk about as Christians, but the importance of courage. Courage is a character trait of a disciple. And like Darius lacks courage at first. And he goes through this lesson and learns courage by the end.
How so?
Because he starts cowardly, where he gives over to the politicians who are trapping him.
People who are
thing.
experienced,
Yeah.
people who have the knowledge.
And then he faces this crisis of, oh no, my best right-hand man, Daniel, is now going to be thrown into a lion's den, and I've trapped myself in this legal thing. He actually tries to like get out of it, and he can't. Oh, and you know, we didn't have time to read the whole thing because it's too long. But ultimately, Daniel says, "Don't worry, I'll be fine." Goes in, faces the lions, comes out fine, and then Darius has a chance, and he's like, "You know what? I'm not going to be subject to these malicious." Now it's a cartoonish, so he ends up throwing in all the bad people into the lion's den. You know, it's a cartoonish kind of like result. We wouldn't really do that. Like that's not what we're advocating for. But the indicator of the indication by the storyteller's standards is that Darius actually learns a lesson and stands up to the people who are manipulating him now, and has like gained courage to, you know what? So be it. We're gonna be walking in truth now, and then makes a thing about how like anybody who speaks against God is, you know, not allowed anymore.
Now,
whatever.
did this realization come? Like, was still within like the 30 days?
It's within. Daniel goes into the lion's den and survives. It happens overnight.
Okay, so like,
And it actually happens probably in the moment where Darius realizes that Daniel is going to be thrown into the lion's den. And he's like, "What, Daniel? I love Daniel." And he's like, "Well, yeah, you signed this into law, though."
He's already in there too. By the way.
And so they, you know, he's trapped and they have to throw. So probably in that moment is the moment of crisis where Darius really has to transform into a new hero that has courage and the ability to stand up. And then Daniel comes out unscathed, and Darius is like, "Good, screw those guys," you know, like the God of heaven is the God, you know, like that kind of a thing. So there's something about the lesson of courage, and I don't think we think about that as enough, at least, about like that being a characteristic of discipleship. Courage is very important if you want to be a follower of Jesus. And I don't mean it in the evangelical way of like, you're going to need to be not afraid to offend people out in public. I don't mean it that way, because that is often how it gets misinterpreted. What I mean is the courage to stand up for what is right, to face down bullies, to defend people who may or may not have like the ability to defend themselves, you know? That's a part of discipleship. It's not enough to be kind and polite all the time. Part of our discipleship is standing up and saying, that's not true. That's not real. Or you're being rude. Or you're making that person feel unwelcomed, and you are welcome here. Don't listen to that guy. You know, like there's something
he's
about
vulnerable
that.
too. I've told you a couple times, and you're like, he's just so oblivious. I thought I was. You're like, nope. Just next time, and you're like, yes, next time.
Be more specific.
Hot dog line.
Well, go ahead. Tell a story. Like, you have my permission.
The quickest way to say this is there's a hot dog line at the end of the night after all the fun has happened.
We were dancing and drinking, and I get a hot dog at the end of the night because I've been a good boy.
Yeah, I'm a good boy and I deserve a hot dog from the vendor. And somebody cuts the line who he doesn't think, maybe he just needs this, or he needs this to feel better about himself or something. Chris snaps and goes, I have been yelled at my whole life to not cut lines, and you're not going to do this to me. And just yelled.
It's the first thing we learn as kindergartens: no cuts.
Instead of just extending, like, it's going to be 35 seconds of my life that I just watched someone get one over me, and that's okay.
I also did have a little bit of, there's like 5 people behind me.
Yeah, you had a little mob mentality.
I did have a little, well, I had a little bit of like, you're cheating.
It's us versus you, and yeah.
But also the decision of like, it's a hot dog.
Yeah.
You know, like we do have to draw a line somewhere.
This isn't signing something into Congress.
Right.
Like, this is wrong.
Yeah.
My other point was the Darius point of view is probably missed, I would think, by most people because of the name of the book. Is you're not paying attention to him. He's kind of just you
think Daniel's the hero.
He's the puppet who you're supposed to think he is. But at the end of the day, the courage comes from failing. That's where courage comes from.
Yeah.
You either think you're going to fail and you make it and you do it, and that's where courage comes from, is I just don't care anymore and I'm just going to do it even if I die. Or, wow, I really, really screwed up, but I'm not going to let this get me down. I'm going to grow from this and let everyone see me grow. It's also a great attribute of a leader, is if I'm going to fail, watch me fail so that you don't do this, and then watch me grow out of this.
Yeah. Like
dying on a tree.
I also feel like true courage, like if we're kind of going with this definition of courage, it has to involve the abandonment of like the ego. You talked about the example of some people saying, well, I gotta assert myself in like a domineering way, and that's not necessarily courage, but that is a tool used for specific things, but is not the essence of courage. Yeah,
sometimes that's useful, but that shouldn't be the default. Like that's what you go to. Yeah,
because that's like pushing through the bodies to get to the baby. That's where that's kind of useful. I need to get to that baby because no one else will. Everyone else is dead, gone, or following something else. Which is where you need that perseverance and, to be blunt, like pure self-ego of I have to do it type of thing.
Yeah.
Versus like, this is kind of personal, stand on a street corner by yourself with a sign saying, this is what I believe, without anyone else around you or no friends being with you in the moment and saying, we all agree on this, versus I have to do this or I don't feel good about myself. There's a fine line, and I think that's kind of what you're saying, is like, is it courage or is it something else that looks like courage to other people, maybe?
Because I'll give a classic example. Facebook, social media loves to see posts that say the equivalent of like, I'm not afraid to say I love Jesus, write amen, and share with 5 people. It's like, that's not really courage.
Right.
Courage is being more of saying, instead of like the traditional, I want to say like 90s and early thousands method of like becoming a Christian is like, I was, terrible person, but then I met Jesus and life's been great ever since. It's now I think is more moving to a mindset of a healthier one of saying like, I am someone who I've lived this way, I've met Jesus, and I still continue to need Jesus as part of my life. Like, I'm not just, completely changed or new. I mean, sometimes that does happen, but I think it takes courage to say like, I am still weak, I'm still fleshy, I'm not going to get it all right.
We're in progress.
Yeah.
Like all of us.
Yeah. Rather than just being like this, like, change will never ever go back to anything at all. That was
both can be true, and I think both are true. Mm-hmm. And so a little bit of traditional theology. John Wesley talks about different graces. That's like one of his major contributions to the theological conversation. Mm-hmm. He talks about prevenient grace, preventing grace, grace before you even know who God is in your life, loving you and extending grace. Then there's justifying grace, which is what we typically think of as like the come to Jesus baptismal moment where you go like, I'm a believer now. Mm-hmm. And we acknowledge that God's grace, that's an act of God's grace, not just human effort, Mm-hmm. But then after that, there's still grace. There's still work. It's called sanctifying grace. And so like you can have moments of, oh my God, I've been changed forever. Yeah. But you're not perfect. Mm-hmm. You're still, there are plenty of those moments probably coming, like
I feel like odds are it's not going to be just one singular manifesting moment that changes everything.
Yeah. And sometimes they are big blinding moments, and sometimes they're gradual work over years, and you just are a kinder person now than you used to be, but there wasn't ever a moment. It's just like, oh, you're gentler, or you're more understanding, or you're more courageous, or you're, like all those things.
I think, tying back with that word courage, I think it takes courage also, and this kind of ties in with the vulnerability, to enable oneself to change into that new identity that maybe God is calling you, especially if it is unfamiliar. Like the phrase that is used often in my work is, for those that are recovering from addiction, it's like you're caught in the battle between choosing a comfortable hell over an uncomfortable heaven.
Yeah.
And you want to go back to
that's a good phrase,
even though like it's bad for you, it's going to end up wrong, you've been down that road before, versus you don't know what this is like yet, but I can promise you it's better if you will just hold on and work toward it, or at least have the faith and confidence to step through right now. Just take this one step in this direction.
So one of the things I wanted to say when you were talking about whatever you were talking about,
hot dog,
great, sure.
It wasn't that important. So
no, wonderful.
One of the thoughts that I had is like how important you were talking about the street corner guy, and like how courage and ego can be confused pretty easily. We can get out there on our own and be insistent upon our own thing. And what made me think of it was what you were talking about with addiction in particular. Like we're asking you to take the step. Just take the step in this direction. The thing that protects ego from courage and courage from ego is community. Like trustworthy community. That's why there's a church. That's why this is not like an individual process that you just commune with God on your own. Yeah. There is a church, hopefully, that you can trust, and I know that that's difficult to come by these days, more so than it used to be. Look, so I acknowledge that. That's hard. I hope that we are being that. But like, if your courage becomes ego, if you're in a community, your community has the ability to pull you back and go like, whoa, wait a minute, dude. Like you are going way too far in this direction. And like, so, the dialogue, it's not legalistic. I don't mean it in that way, because sometimes churches can be judgmental and legalistic. I'm talking more about the dialogue of like, and I've experienced this in this church. Like, hey man, you're getting a little aggressive in these areas, and you need to dial that back and take a look at it. And I've tried to, and like I've taken that seriously. And there's also been times where I'm going, no, I really have looked at it, and this is one of those things where I need to take a step out onto the ledge a little bit, or on the limb, I guess is a better metaphor, and take the risk of being like, no, I think mob mentality is drawing us this way, and I'm saying we need to. Like, those are all things about my discipleship. Those are born out of not my fortitude and character, but they're born out of the grace of Jesus Christ, who has made me into something that I couldn't be on my own. There is something about God's grace that allows us to really take a look inside, receive feedback from the people we love, and like actually hear it, and not be afraid of changing, and also not be afraid of taking a step even when it's unpopular. Like that, they sound like they're opposites, but they're the same thing, which is courage. And it's courage that's rooted in the grace of God. I'm not defined by what people say about me or even what I think about me. I'm defined by a grace and a God that is bigger and infinite and all powerful and all loving. Like, I am defined by that, and therefore I can stand up for what is right, and I can be courageous enough to receive the feedback of the people I trust when they're telling me I'm being a jerk, you know? Like, those seem like opposites, but they're the same thing. We've gone on way too long. We've gone on way too, as we often do. But this was I think this was such a thick and good conversation that I thought it was worth it. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you courage. Amen.